right, this is episode 18, an audio interview with Dr. Peter Ward. He's a paleontologist, a biology scientist. His resume the list goes on and on of his degrees, his publications, a list as long as my arm. So let's get right to it. But before we do, just so you know, this won't be the last episode on climate change. We're going to do kind of like we are doing with oligarchies, doing periodic episodes as we explore and get down into the weeds on this very serious subject. So without further ado, Dr. Peter Ward. All right. So Dr. Peter Ward, excuse me. What do you do? And I'm calling you about climate change. So tell us a little background about yourself.
Well, I'm not a doctor of climate change. And actually, it's so strange to call professors a doctor anyway. Take two aspirin and see me in the classroom tomorrow? Nah, that's probably not going to work. So I am a trained paleontologist. I now exist as a professor of biology and a professor of earth and space science. And for one point in my life, I was a card-carrying astrobiologist, of all things. So, in my field, we're a bit like Madonna. We keep reinventing ourselves with new who we are over and over.
Oh, wow. I'm always, I always love a chance to talk to science guys. They're always the smartest people in the room, and I'm filming in Ohio, and there's not too many smart people in any of the rooms. So it's refreshing. Thank you. I know that you suffered through a blizzard to talk with us.
Oh boy, and it's still here. This is a great segue into climate change. I was born in Seattle, Washington, 69.8 years ago. So I'll be hitting 70 here in a couple months. I've spent maybe 10 years away, but so say 60 years of experience in Seattle, Washington. The blizzard we had was 3 blizzards over about 3 days. The greatest snowfall on record of anybody's record happened in the last 3 days. So anytime anything happens that is a record nowadays, when we keep so many records, should really wake us up. So just like the East Coast had record cold, just like you guys had such a long period of cold because of those Arctic cold airs coming down, the vortex, we now are experiencing something that's out of the ordinary. I don't know if you noticed what just happened in Hawaii. Hawaii had the biggest waves they've ever had. Wow. Hawaii, for the first time ever, had snow on Maui at the lowest elevation it's ever been, at 6,000 feet. The gigantic storm that was Hawaii is now what they called an atmospheric river that is flooded California. So we are experiencing the greatest series of climate change events historically in terms of rainfall, in terms of wave height, in terms of wind speeds. Wind speed at the great observatories on the Big Island of Hawaii hit 191 miles per hour. I've been up there. That nobody can stand in a 200 mile an hour wind. And this is all because of recent climate change that, according to Republicans, does not exist.
All right. Well, before we get into that, I want to ask you, because you're the canary in the mine when it comes to the web series and the documentary. We haven't interviewed anybody about climate change yet. But before we get into climate change, I have a personal question for me. And I think I've angered a god, and I need some science help. All right. When I'm in California and it's 72 degrees outside, and I stop the car, I go to the grocery store, what have you, and it's still 72 degrees outside. But I get back to the car and it's fucking hot. It's hot in there. Now, you're being a science guy. I'd like to ask you, what god have I angered? The Christian God getting mad at me because of my question.
No,
all right. Can you give me an answer again?
Yes, it's the car god. Detroit.
The car god?
name convertible did it.
Oh,
See,
all
because
right.
you don't have a convertible. Every Californian is supposed to have a convertible. So that God fries the inside of your car saying, thou shalt not have a hardtop.
All right. I offended the convertible God.
Yes,
Now,
you did.
could there be any other explanation besides divine intervention?
Well, certainly that windshield of yours is acting like a lens, and you have within the air in that car enough moisture molecules that you feel it getting really hot. Now, you wouldn't be so hot if you didn't have moisture in that car, but that's just what our skin picks up, hot, moist, hot water molecules.
Okay. All right. So continue with the car question. That that explains why the car gets so hot. The sun rays get in there and warm up those water molecules and makes it hot, and I offend the convertible God. Now, as I'm driving along and I've got a bad muffler and a bad air filter, I can see smoke coming out of my exhaust pipe. What is that stuff? Is that like car waste? Is that, tell me about that.
Yes, you've got worse things going on than a bad muffler. Clearly, your car is producing, it's burning oil. So you are not, the internal combustion engine that you have in there isn't functioning correctly. So you need to fix that car. And
Mhm.
going back to the analogy, why it's hot in there, this is a perfect model for understanding what CO2, greenhouse gases, do in our atmosphere. Let's
What
pretend
is CO2? That sounds awfully sciency.
carbon dioxide. So let's
Okay.
just say that your windshield and the windows in your car are made up of carbon dioxide molecules, and the inside of your car is the surface of the earth.
Oh, all right. That's starting to make sense now. But like, in my car, I don't have a convertible, so I have a roof on it. But if couldn't we stop global warming by getting rid of the the hardtop and put a convertible on it?
Well, you certainly could if you got rid of the CO2, the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And that, of course, is the great single goal. That's the amazing thing about this whole climate change is that there aren't a zillion things you have to do. And there aren't a zillion causes. There's one really simple cause and effect.
Mm-hmm.
More carbon dioxide and also other greenhouse gases, which include methane. So cow farts, and that's why
Mm-hmm.
there is now this discussion about we get rid of cows and we can really reduce climate change. That's totally correct. Not just from the methane they produce, but the amount of land it takes to feed a cow is very wasteful. I mean, there are a lot of people pushing, let's get rid of red meat, and we really do increase the conservation efforts of carbon dioxide. That's the end of hamburgers. So most people say, no, I want my burgers, but I also want there to be mitigation against these nasty climate events.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking at 18 inches of snow here, and we had several people freeze to death. Who there are more and more homeless. We keep saying that the American economy is doing so well and there's no unemployment. If that's the case, why are there more homeless people in my town than ever before in history?
Have you
Economic,
ever have you ever visited Santa Monica?
yes. And I've also visited Santa Cruz, where I think there were as many homeless people as you could imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to take that analogy, go to Canada, because Vancouver and Victoria are the Santa Monica of Canada. It's
Mm-hmm.
the Vancouver's a very cold place most of the year. Nevertheless, it's the warmest place in all of Canada during the winter. And so the home contingent there is just really heartbreaking.
And that's because of the warmth, the relative warmth and the infrastructure there. That's why a lot of us go up there to shoot, um, not deer, but movies. So it's but yeah, it's terrible about the homelessness. All right, so you say CO2. Now I can see through CO2, can I?
Yes. And the other aspect is what really strikes me about it is how few carbon dioxide molecules there are, and yet how powerful they are. I mean, we're looking, let's have a little glass jar, and let's just
Okay.
pretend that it has 1 million molecules of gas. So 2/3 or more of them are little nitrogen atoms bouncing
Hmm.
around. N2, so they're two little nitrogen atoms bound together. And then about 21% of them are oxygen molecules, two little
Hmm.
oxygen atoms bound together. And then out of those million atoms right now, there's only 400 carbon dioxide molecules. 400 out of the million. And yet that is sufficient. Were there no carbon dioxide molecules in the Earth's atmosphere, the oceans would freeze right now and our temperature would drop below 0 centigrade all over the planet.
So
400
that
of those
that in
molecules.
effect is the convertible top.
It is. And if we increase, just put 600 more in that jar of ours for the millions, 600 plus 400, 1,000 carbon dioxide molecules out of 1 million gas molecules would raise the temperature of this planet to what it was during the age of dinosaurs. There will be no ice anywhere on planet Earth, anywhere.
Headed towards maybe a Venus-like atmosphere.
Well, I don't think so. No, Venus has so much more carbon dioxide than we do, but it certainly is going to be a place where there will never be snow again.
Hmm.
The oceans will be hundreds of feet higher than they are because all of Greenland ice sheets and all of the Antarctic ice sheets will have melted. We will have worldwide jungle.
Wow.
We will lose the grasslands. No grasslands, just jungle of a very water world where huge areas that are now land will be underwater and there will be tropical oceans.
Will dinosaurs come back?
No, not much will come back because by that time we will have eliminated so many land animals towards extinction that we will be looking at a rat infested world. Rodent size will be the most common animals.
How big will these rats be?
Oh, house cat size, and house cats probably what domesticated animals will do well. House cats right now are being Australians are trying to ban them because they've gotten loose, they've gone feral. Australia had the most beautiful bird fauna, which every time I go back, there are fewer and fewer because the cats are so good at killing these stupid Australian birds, which are mostly ground birds. These beautiful small parrots, which run around on the ground, and the cats are destroying them. So that kind of world, we got rats and cats.
All right, let's bring it back down to Earth, shall we? You mentioned that there were people that deny, all right, or the additional carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Now, anybody who's gotten into a car, in a parking lot, knows that the car is hotter. Don't you guys call it the greenhouse effect?
Yes, that's correct.
All right, but what causes somebody to deny what is so obvious?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. First of all, I break them down into reasons that are economic,
Mm-hmm.
that a lot of people have a good vested interest in there being a carbon-based energy source on the planet. Lots of stocks and bonds in our portfolios depend upon Standard Oil, the old
Mm-hmm.
Exxons of the world. So there's economic aspect. Secondly, there's religious aspects. There are huge numbers of people who believe that there's a deity up there of some sort and that there could not be such major change coming from physical effects. It must be done by God. So God has ordained this, that this is the will of God, however you want to say that. It certainly isn't we humans. Just this idea that we humans, some people think we're,
Convertible God.
the convertible God of some sort is making all these changes.
What about Ra? Because isn't Ra the sun god?
Ra's extinct. Have you ever seen the wonderful book American Gods? It was put out 10 years ago about,
Uh-uh.
and interestingly, this is made into a TV series now. When all the immigrants came to America, each of them brought their gods with them. But as they converted to other religions, gods only exist if you worship them. When Ra, the last worshiper of Ra, died, Ra dies too.
Huh. Well, didn't the Norse come here first? So they had Odin here for a while.
And the whole plot of American gods is that Odin is the chief god, and there's a war among gods. And Odin is in a fight with the MTV god, the cell phone god, the popular culture god, the just know-nothing gods. Odin dies out just for that reason.
Now, that gives us a problem. Like when we're sacrificing a virgin, all right? I mean, does one virgin cover all the gods, or do we have to sacrifice a virgin for every god? Wouldn't we run out of virgins?
As an academic, I respectfully ask not to go there dealing with gender. Any aspect there of that minefield is way too potent. Okay. Next question.
It's hard to find virgins anywhere nowadays. So,
well, it's hard.
All right. So they have a vested interest in keeping the oil company, the oil flowing. All right. But our elected officials, they do what's best for the people, right?
Unicorns just ran right by my house. Wow, look at that.
All right, now, we're back to the exhaust thing. When people first started thinking lead was a poison, that was like back in Egyptian times, right?
Yeah, I don't know, but we certainly know that it is a poison, as many others. I mean, this old idea, mad as a hatter, because so many metals, mercury, for instance, lead, once they get into our bodies, they are brain killers. Just lead exposure was leading to a 10-point drop in IQ of all American kids in the 50s.
I read a book, and I think it mentioned it as far back as Egyptian times knew that lead was a poison. And it became real popular around the early 1900s, late 1800s, for women to kill their husbands by poisoning them with lead. But the bottom line is we certainly knew that lead was poison. And the car companies, they thought it would make the car run a little bit better by putting lead into gasoline, right?
Yes, and they did run better.
All right. But we were injecting poison into the atmosphere.
Well, why do so many people smoke cigarettes?
I'm going to get to that. All right. But eventually, the elected officials came around and they decided that, all right, we've had enough, because we're sniffing in the same air. And so they changed it. Now that's that point in history. Now, you mentioned cigarettes. It wasn't until the attorney generals started suing the tobacco companies, the cigarette companies, and winning, that they started to acknowledge that they had lied to us, that cigarettes aren't healthy, and they're a carcinogen. They're going to cause cancer and all kinds of health problems. But the attorney generals were able to sue they had a target. They had the gas or the cigarette companies. If the elected officials are not going to do anything about gas in the CO2 in the atmosphere, and who could the attorney generals sue? And it would only be here in the United States. It's a global thing.
Well, they've already done it. There have been states that have already tried to sue the big oil companies. But once again, if you start looking at economic power, the power and the wealth of the oil companies absolutely dwarfs the tobacco companies. I mean, there's no comparison whatsoever. So yes, they were able to sue the tobacco companies, which is a fairly narrow type of, or is at least exposed to machines that need oil. I mean, everybody. There's not a single one of us. You can drop smoking and it doesn't affect people as much as dropping gasoline and heat power. So it is a far bigger problem.
All right, so the attorney generals have those started. They've sued a couple oil companies. And
Yes.
Is it over climate change or is it over oil spills or something like that?
Climate change.
Really?
Yes.
That's something. Now, any other attorney general equivalents in India or China or any of those emerging markets? Are they doing anything on an individual country basis besides the Paris Accord on an individual basis?
They will soon in India because this last summer, United Airlines ceased flying into several Indian cities because the smog and the pollution was so great it affected not only visibility, but it was affecting their pilots' health. It was so desperate. Same as apparently in Beijing in China. China and New Delhi and several Indian cities are now so affected because they have mainly gas-fired power plants. And it is the waste coming out of coal-fired plants really that is the worst. And the East Coast of the United States, Ohio, I just noticed that the TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, is removing old coal plants against the wishes of the President of the United States.
Jesus. All right. All right, Peter, give me something optimistic here, bud.
Just the fact that 10 years ago, the proportion of people worried about climate change was small compared to now. None of these things take place in a yearly scale. We are talking about major change that is decadal. It is the need for decades to go by. And I will point out, for instance, gay marriage. Go back to the 60s, 70s, 80s, even Obama. When Obama was elected, he said against gay marriage.
I remember that.
8 years later, he's all for it. That one happened pretty fast, probably 20 years. So these things are not overnight effects. Major change in understanding and belief systems are long, slow changes. And the bigger our population, the slower the change.
All right. If change or recognition, oh, there's recognition of the problem. Remember the Olympics in China? They turned off the factories for a couple of weeks before the Olympics. They knew that they could turn the switch off and the air would be better so that they would put on a good show for all of the tourists coming in for the Olympics. I mean, it's recognized, it's understood, and yet they're not throwing the switch at all. No one's stopping it. It's just continuing. And I've heard, and it scares the bejesus out of me. You're talking slow change as a political function, but does the carbon dioxide molecules give a shit about us and our slowness for change?
Well, no. And again, just the sense that for the longest time, it was always, well, our next generation are going to be affected, but so far it hasn't hit us. But that's nonsense.
How many inches of snow you got outside there, sir?
18 inches in 3 days. And it shut down the place. Our university closed for 4 days. No schools are open. We're freezing to death outside. This, again, is a record snow. Seattle normally gets an inch at most per year. We don't get snow here. And boy, we're getting it now.
18 inches. And I can only imagine people in Seattle trying to drive.
Well, they can't because Seattle is a city of hills. I lived in Columbus, Ohio. 18 inches of snow is doable. It's pretty flat.
That's a Tuesday.
Cleveland, 18 inches, no problem. Buffalo, I mean, the Great Flatlands. But when you are in a place that is hilly as Seattle, this is a nightmare.
Yeah. I remember I lived in Denver for a while. And even though it's a mile high city and all that, there's so many new people coming in from the south and what have you, driving for the first time on icy roads and with the hills and all. It's just a mess, an absolute mess. But anyways, we digress. All right, so what about a tipping point that everybody's talking about, that we're slow to change, carbon carbon dioxide in the air, in the atmosphere, isn't, it's getting worse. Could there come a point where it's irreversible?
Let's be more precise with the language. Let's change tipping point to tipping interval. A point is a single thing. An interval is a range of things.
Okay.
So I really do believe when we say tipping point, it is not useful in the sense that people think, aha, we'll hit that point and then we go downhill from there. It's
okay.
Interval of effects and things. And yes, there are irreversible tipping intervals. It's very difficult to know where they are until after you've tipped.
Makes sense. Makes sense. But it is a concern we should have. It is something we should worry about.
Oh, absolutely.
Now, let me ask you, these are elected officials. And you have a population, a democracy, allegedly. What about just kind of educating the public? Tell them that it isn't an act of God, and explain to them why. And if the public got scared enough, might they just demand of an elected official, you have to vote against the oil companies, you have to do something about the environment?
There's only two things that will really sway public opinion: dollars and lives lost. Economics drives the world's economies and the politics of it. But sudden, huge human mortalities can change opinion. The dollars are going to be most affected, I believe, by sea level rise.
Okay, like Miami goes under. People have to start holding their breath in Miami.
Yeah, but Miami is one city. That's not going to affect. Let's think about sea level rise, about the world's railroads. Most railroads are places that were the easiest to build. The easiest places to build quite often were coastlines. So at least up here, the railroads, the West Coast railroads, have huge swaths of running right next to the water. There's a beautiful ride from Seattle to Vancouver because you're going by Puget Sound. The cost to replace not just the railroads, we know that every coastline in the United States appears to have a highway along it. The highway is to the right of it towards the ocean are the rich people's houses, but the highways quite often run right on the coastline. If we have to replace railroads and highways on coastlines, the amount of cost to the US economy will sober a lot of people. Secondly, CNN a few years ago said, what will happen if we need to replace all of the ports and their wharves and their cranes? Because the ships that come in, because the ocean is higher, they no longer fit. We can't get those box cars off the ships. CNN was saying, they were estimated even 10 years ago, gee, we need $3 to $5 trillion to redo the ports. We're just talking the ports. Airports. How many airports come in over the ocean and land?
If you LaGuardia, man, it's famous.
Absolutely. San Francisco. The Miami is at very low, but in Australia,
LAX is really close to the water.
These things, LAX is a little higher, but if you land in San Francisco, in Hawaii, on Oahu, you're taking off right on the water. Seattle just built a new runway that was easy to build. The land was already flat. They just had to put in a new runway. It cost $1 billion for that runway. Now, let's say we have to replace hundreds of airports all over the world. The economics of climate change is going to be the huge driver of politics because people are going to be paying.
If you had a guesstimate on when that starts to, when people at the airports have to get buckets and start bailing, when would that be? When would we first start seeing that phenomenon manifest itself?
I think right now, it's not so much buckets, but already these airports are paying huge money recognizing what's coming. So we're seeing planning. It costs so much just to think about things the bridge that separates Washington State from Oregon near Portland is going to cost, if not hundreds of millions, perhaps $1 billion. The two states quit planning it simply because they could not, either of them, afford their state portion of building the new bridge. But the planning itself was budgeted at hundreds of millions of dollars to plan it, not even a brick and mortar. So when you start thinking about the planning necessary for dealing with all coastal cities, right there, the economics is the driver.
Amazing. Now, one solution, why don't we give tax breaks to the rich so that they have so much money that they can afford to fix all these things? And it would trickle down and inure to our benefits.
Because the rich are rich because they never give a goddamn anything to anybody.
I should have you on with our last guest. He is a political science professor, and his specialty is oligarchies. So that's where that question comes from. The rich have been referred to throughout economic philosophy as usurpers, and it was interesting that the word usurp comes from Latin, meaning to rape.
Well, Maureen Dowd, the famous New York Times columnist, did a column on
used to be with the Boston Globe. Love her.
And so I was the only person defending Bezos because I know him socially. He's been to my house.
That's right, the Seattle thing. Yeah.
So I was castigated for actually saying, let's respect their marriage breakup, the grieving they have to go through. He's actually a sweet guy. Give him some space, and we should all support what he's doing against Packer or Penis Head, the guy who's running this yellow journalism.
I mean, mushroom penis guy or the penis guy at
Pecker, who defends
Inquirer?
The National Enquirer guy. So I was castigated for saying anything nice about Bezos at all, which actually surprised me that the vehemence against this rich guy is so over the top.
I think people are getting mad about the situation, and I think it's fueled by a number of things. And I think just the arrogance of the oil barons owning the politicians, and people are getting angry. I'm reading a book now about neoliberals, and it's a British PM wrote it. And he says there's two factions of people that are angry, the far left and the far right. And recently the far right have been winning in England and in the United States. And never the two roads shall meet. So again, no hope there, but people are getting angry.
Where did that come from, left and right? Why isn't it up and down or front and back? I've never understood the origin of left communist and socialist and right fascist. These are spectra, but I'm just curious how that originated in the first place.
I wish I knew. Why did they choose red and blue? No one had red and blue states before. There was just stupid Southerners and everybody else.
Elephants and donkeys. Yeah, it's curious how the origins of things.
Yeah, it is. There's even a name for that, the study of the origins of words and language and all that, but that escapes me. All right, so you don't have an answer to this, Peter.
Etymology.
Etymology, that's it. Yes, thank you.
Yes.
I knew we had a smart guy in the room. The question again was, if you had a magic wand and you couldn't perform absolute miracles and just wave away climate change, but you could affect the changes necessary to begin that curve, to change the road we're on, where would you wave the wand?
Over humanity's head, for the realization that this is real and that every person can make a difference.
All right. That's pretty big, though. Is there anything else? Because I wouldn't put my faith in humanity.
Well, we don't have any other choice, because anything else you're saying, the waving a wand is what Hitler did to rid himself of Jews. It is what our president has just done to build a wall. Waving a wand is what tyrants do.
Yeah, that's a whole nother episode, Peter. The theme is that all civilizations fail. All empires uniformly, 100%, have all failed. And we have the ruins, the pyramids, Mayans all over the world to prove it. But we don't know why. And we submit, as part of the literary conceit of this documentary, that it's because humans are idiots. They're self-referential creatures. They're conscious, therefore self-referential. And all self-referential systems fail. That's another universal truth. Or can we?
Well, let's take a step back.
Okay.
There was years ago this famous saying called the selfish gene, that genes themselves, this little bits of DNA, are working for themselves. I like to think, in we humans, let's call it the selfish genome.
Okay.
We who are parents are trying to make the world better for our kids. Now, make the world better for our kids in most of human history is, can I get that kid to survive? Can I get that kid to get through the dangers of childhood into adulthood, into an economic safety net so that they can produce their kids? So to do that, what drives that is economics, because economics lets you buy food. It lets you buy shelter, it lets you buy heat, it lets you buy protection. So humans are driven to be selfish genomes. We want our genome, as manifested in our kids, to have safety, to succeed, to be able to not die early. And so all of humanity, civilizations fall for a simple reason, because of economic reasons, economic chaos. It takes money to buy food. Food perhaps is the money itself, but also money is warmth in a cold place. Money is housing to keep you from the elements, where the elements can kill you. And so these are the drivers.
All right, so we're motivated to get money to help our kids. But our great patriarch in the White House just a couple of weeks ago said, I don't care, I'll be dead by then.
Well, you're talking about you think humans are idiots. There are certainly some spectacular examples, and he is certainly one of those. I personally think that this may sound anathema. In a way, electing Trump is going to turn out to be a very good thing for American society, because it shows us the dangers of what tyranny can do, of how one person, presidential power is now so huge compared to what it was back by the founding fathers, that we're now getting an idea of how strong or not our institutions are. And yet I think America is going to survive this, but be stronger, recognizing that the Republican Party and its president are selfish, and that they're not, their genomes are dealing with their own party, not their kids. And that party is really for white males only.
I'm going to make a parallel to the evangelicals and the Scopes monkey trial. Took place in Tennessee around 1925, 1930, somewhere in there. And, they're prosecuting this guy for teaching evolution. And the evangelicals got all up, their hair up in a wire, and they charged him with a crime. And there was the trial to get him off the hook. But it brought national attention to Tennessee. And it was a national, if not international, embarrassment about, showing these hillbillies to be inbred idiots suing some guy for teaching science, and literally criminal prosecution. And it embarrassed them so much, the evangelicals, that they turtled up. You didn't hear from them for a long time because of all the embarrassment they caused. They were embarrassed. Do you think that the good you're alluding to here might be that some real dumb idiots will turtle up and go away? That, look what they've wrought upon society?
Well, in that trial, as you know, the teacher was convicted. He lost the trial. So, but I think in the end, they didn't give him a very nasty sentence because of just those personal attention that the rest of the country directed at them.
Mm-hmm.
In the case of society today, just the degree of hypocrisy by the Christian right now in just giving our president a pass for his morality and his moral transgressions against their mores, I think has gotten to the point, it's so ridiculous that it is probably, if not silencing them, just letting more and more millennials understand how absolutely bankrupt these people are in ideas, in ideology, and in morality. Mm-hmm. So once again, I think we're really seeing just the rise of the evangelicals really, again, goes back to economics. The powerful are those which were taking in millions and millions of dollars from the mega churches. These guys who go on TV and ask you to send in money are gulling the gullible.
All right, speaking of your books, and we're kind of coming up on the hour long here. So I wanted to talk to you. We spoke, before to set up the interview, and you just published a new book about does stress have an effect on our DNA? Am I getting that right?
Yes, absolutely.
And just like, any evolutionary speed bump and or evolution, gene mutation, it plays a role. Do you think stress might have an effect on human evolution?
Absolutely. One of the things that Darwin did, unfortunately, Darwin reduced the effect of animal behavior in terms of its role in evolution. So we know natural selection, Darwin put it entirely down to morphology, the beak of a finch. If it had this shape, you survived. If it didn't, you didn't. But look at behavior. You live or die based on what you do. If you walk into traffic, remember the old Darwin Awards? You're going to be dead really quick.
Yeah.
Behavior is something that natural selection absolutely works on. Lamarck was the first to say that major evolutionary change is like going through this hopper. We never used that morphology. You put one thing in, and sooner or later, progeny come out looking differently. We always think morphology. But what about behavior? Behavior is affected. DNA, there are genes for behavior. Genetics and behavior are where we have least researched and where we must now really better understand in terms of human evolution. The cell phones, look at how we are now inured to them, but also video games. If you've ever seen the violence in video games, it's now so realistic that those who do practice are deadened to violence, essentially. I believe the fact that we're finding ever more shootings going on is a reflection of the fact that we are now, through the news, so capable of putting violence into your face over and over and over that there's an extinction event. It no longer shocks.
Back to climate change. We've got to work on humanity, you say. All right. We got to bring them around. And I think you're playing an important role, making yourself available here. We're trying to reach out to as many people as possible, and you're helping. You're taking time off from your day, suffering through a blizzard, so it's appreciated. But besides doing webisodes and documentaries and all that, what else can we do to help change the curve of humanity's road that they're on?
Vote.
Vote?
Vote. But not
Get
only
people to vote.
get people involved in the process that leads to a vote. You cannot vote out of thin air. You've got to have an opinion. So I think going back to educating ourselves on the issues is the most important aspect.
All right, one last thing then. If voting is the key, let me be provocative here because I need ratings. Didn't Plato in his book or books, The Republic, didn't he have a mock debate with Socrates, an argument, if you will, with the issue was voting, and that people shouldn't be allowed, all people shouldn't be allowed to vote because all people aren't educated. All people don't know who they're voting for. They're not experts. They shouldn't be given the right to pick the leaders if they aren't experts in the field of choosing a leader. What do you say about that?
Well, let's go back to Ulysses Grant and the American Civil War. Grant was a leader in pushing for the African American vote because the same argument was used. They are not educated. They don't have an idea. Therefore, don't let them vote. On the other aspect, going back to that Plato and Socrates, look what happened to poor Socrates. So some of these debates, we think they're airy-fairy, have no effect. They do. So I would say, yes, educate and vote. I appreciate what you're doing too. Keep at it.
Okay. All right, Peter, something tells me we're going to have to revisit this. Something tells me I'm going to need your opinion again down the road. Because I think we discussed so many things today that we got off the climate change discussion more than we were on it. So what's the name of that book about stress and DNA?
Well, the book is called Lamarck's Revenge. And in it, I document how stress itself creates a more rapid rate of mutations in microbes to humans.
All right, and it's available where?
Everywhere. Well, I know I'm on the right track because I've gotten the worst reviews I've ever gotten from people that are so angry because it's new. It's a whole new take.
In that Time Machine book, what were the name of the people that were underground, the cannibals?
The Morlocks.
Will we become Morlocks under all the stress from Trump?
I'd rather we become the Eloi, personally.
They were much better looking. All right, Peter, thank you for your time, man. A great interview. I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right.
Ciao.